Hello there, Pursuing Freedom community. Thank you for tuning in today. I am your host, Erin Bradley. And if it's your first time here, welcome aboard. If you've been here before, thanks for tuning in again. I am so excited today. I've got Jeff Sutherland here, and he is the author of one of my favorite books of all time that I recommend incessantly to everyone who will listen to me. And that book is called Scrum, The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time. And Jeff has a very impressive resume, which he can share more of, but he's not only the co-creator of Scrum Inc., he's also a former Air Force pilot, had a background in all kinds of things, biometrics, cancer research, and later technology. And nowadays he trains thousands to achieve double the productivity in half the time. And what's interesting is we were talking before we started recording about one of his more in-depth books around this topic of Scrum, which is the first principles of Scrum. And it's all about the magic of teamwork. And he was talking about now with the evolution of AI, how instead of looking at doing twice the work in half the time, he's exploring how to do 10 times the work in a tenth of the time. So I think there's going to be a ton of value in this conversation. And if you've been listening to the podcast a long time, you know how passionate I am about simplifying success. And that is literally what Jeff has spent his whole life doing. So with no further ado, Jeff, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. I'm so happy to have you here.
Glad to be here.
I shared a little bit of the resume there, but what brought you to this passion for Scrum and teamwork? And tell us a little bit about the backstory behind the evolution of this concept.
Well, I've had three careers, and I'm probably starting my fourth career right now. But the first one was as a fighter pilot in the Air Force, specifically in reconnaissance. I flew 100 missions over North Vietnam. Half of the people I flew with got shot down. So we need a strategy of planning that allowed you to rapidly respond to the most highly defended airspace in the history of aerial warfare, okay? And your ability to respond quickly determines survival. So all the operational stuff that's in the book on Scrum is actually how to respond quickly to changes. And it turns out that changes in the market or in real estate or in whatever business you're in are the same as changes when you're flying, right? It's the same dynamic. And by being able to respond more quickly and more effectively, you can be more successful. And so, gaining freedom, which is what you're all about, is to be able to respond more quickly than your competitors so that you break free from the pack, so to speak. And a lot of the work I'm doing right now is an investment. I'm trying to train agile leadership to do better investment strategies because as we move into the world with AI, the whole labor market's going to completely change. The whole structure of how things are done is changing. So the second career, and it really evolved out of the Air Force. I was a professor at the Air Force Academy. The University of Colorado School of Medicine hired me to run a big grant, and we spent about $30 million over a decade on my focus was on studying the human cell. How does a human cell, the grant was from the National Cancer Institute, how does the human cell turn into a cancer cell? And it turns out that there are four steps, and if you can figure out what causes those steps, you can not only cure cancer, but you can turn a cancer cell back into a normal cell. So this ability to understand the process of evolution at the cellular level created the background for what became the underlying theory about Scrum. Now, from the medical school, back in the early 80s, we had the same situation we have right now. I have a healthcare company, and we're working with some of the leading researchers in longevity, reverse aging. I was just talking to David Sinclair at Harvard, and the Harvard people have had a lot of their grants cut. And so we're trying to figure out how to maybe replace that with more private funding. And the challenge he has is the same challenge I had in 1983, because under the Reagan administration, they started cutting all the grants. And so my grant was stopped. So I'm in the same situation as the guys at Harvard now, back in 1980. So I had to figure out what to do. My department chairman said, no problem. We've got lots of grants. We can put you on. But I had run my own grant for a decade or more. And a large banking company came by and they said, Jeff, you're the leading expert in technology we're using in the bank in the Midwest. You're using it for cancer research, but we're using it to roll out automated teller systems, cash machines all over North America. We're running 150 banks. Why don't you come to work for us and lead our technology? And we'll start by doubling your salary, and if that's not enough, we can talk about it. So I discussed with my wife, as a impoverished initially graduate student, then junior professor, we decided to join the bank. As soon as we joined the bank, I'm working on the new technologies, but I'm noticing all their projects are late. And I went to the CEO and I said, Ron, have you noticed all your projects are late? He said, yeah, every morning at least five CEOs or CIOs of banks call me up and they scream at me, he says. And I said, wow. He said, you're in big trouble because it's getting worse. Projects are getting later and later. And so he said, well, what should I do about it? And I said, well, we need a completely different operating system. We can't change the whole bank at once. So let's take the worst business unit, the business unit losing the most money, and we'll introduce a new way of working. And within 6 months, that business unit was the most profitable business unit in the bank. And what we introduced is what we now call Scrum at Scale. All Scrum teams, all self-organizing, working together, facilitative leadership to build a business, delivering twice the value with half the effort. That's where Scrum comes from, by taking the operational aspects that I learned as a fighter pilot, combining that with the theoretical aspects of biological evolution and performance, and taking that into the commercial sector and radically improving delivery. And we've done that in real estate in the sense that we can take virtually any real estate project, which typically is over budget and late, right? And we
Yeah.
can bring it online in time, on budget, usually with much less budget, by using the Scrum process, right? Anybody who really wants to be free needs to have much more impact with much less effort.
So, Jeff, I got a question for you. I feel like this is one of the things that is so interesting and confusing about entrepreneurship and business in general is that in some industries, you have natural organizational structures, right? You've got leadership and entry level and mid level and senior level and executive and all the things, right? And in the world I'm in, and I experienced this myself, which is the real estate space, I spent far too many years as a solopreneur riding this roller coaster of either broke or burned out because if business was slow, I would do all the things to generate the business and put on my business development hat. And then business would come in and then I would put on my customer service hat, right? And then I had to put on my accounting hat and then I had to put on all the other hats. And so it seems to me in hindsight just how obvious the benefit of the concept of Scrum and self-organizing teams and the incredible magic that is available. But then there's still so much resistance around it and fear. So as you have been training, thousands of different industries, you've lived in many industries, like what kind of resistance have you seen as you've approached the implementation of the concept? And maybe we can unpack the concept a little bit too, but I'm just kind of curious from a psychological perspective, have you been met with resistance as you've been coaching teams to get better and be more effective
Yeah.
and more efficient?
So a good example, a few years ago, we were training GE, and they had a Silicon Valley uh, center with 1,000 developers, and I was training all the management. So we had the management and Scrum training for Scrum Masters, product owners, and then leadership. And I said to the head guy, I said, it's clear in the training, you sat through it, that a third of those people don't want to change. About a third of them want to make things better, and a third of the other third will do whatever you tell them. So what are you going to do? That's the challenge. You know, a lot of people don't want to change. They want to just stay stuck and miserable. The strategy that I always take, and okay, we need to work with the willing. Okay, we need to find who is actually wants to do something great. And then we want to organize them in a way that they're extremely successful and then show that to the rest of the organization. And then when you do that, more of the organization will come along, right? They'll say, "Hey, well that looks good. You've done it." And sometimes people will start complaining. They'll say, "Those people are getting all the pats on the back from management because they're so successful. It's not fair."
Right.
And then we say, "Okay, well, if you volunteer to do this, you can be part of this. Are you ready to make a commitment?" And then you pull people in. What we found in multiple companies is once you get 30% of the company really successful using Scrum, the CEO looks around, he says, "How come a third of my company is hugely successful? I never have to worry about them. And the other two-thirds are extremely unsuccessful, and I have to spend day after day dealing with things that I don't want to be dealing with. It's just a bunch of ineffectual nonsense and non-delivery." And once you get 30% of the company really working, the CEO says, "I got a decision to make. They're all going to do it or they're going to be out of here." That's what it comes to, right? You have to you have to deal with the resistance. And in fact, in my background, I had many years of training in Aikido, a martial art. And in Aikido, it's a defensive martial art. You always lead with an open hand. You're always being attacked. You lead with an open hand. You welcome the attacker. And then when they move, you position yourself so you can turn their energy into something that neutralizes them.
Mm.
So they come at you, and all of a sudden they're on a floor in an arm lock and they can't move, right? And we need the same kind of strategy in business. Okay, people don't want to do what needs to be done. They may attack, undermine. You need to set it up so you use that energy in a way that makes the whole organization more productive. That means you neutralize the resistance. And when they're neutralized, you tell them they have a choice. They can participate and be great like everybody else, or they can go find another job someplace else.
I love this, how you said earlier, you've got to work with the willing.
Right.
And I
Work with
just made a
the
note, like having a culture of willing. And are you ready to volunteer to make a commitment? And it reminds me of a mentor I had once that made a comment about everyone on the team needs to be Super Bowl ready. Like you're up there in Boston, so we'll use the Patriots, Tom Brady didn't win a Super Bowl alone, right? He needed
right.
good defense, good receivers, and everybody had to want to win, to be willing, right? And I think that one of the things that happens as people transition from being a technician in their business, for example, to being a leader is that if they have one bad apple, they convince themselves they're better off on their own or they're better off alone or whatever. Like you get burned once. And so, as you've been working with leaders, how have you helped them sort of stay the course even when they've been burned because they've got people on the team that aren't willing, they're not Super Bowl ready, they're not the right fit. And unfortunately that happens. We have to go, face the music at times and say, this is not a fit. It's not a fit for us. It's not a fit for you. But that doesn't mean we give up on the belief, which is really the psychological piece that there are people out there that we can find and attract that are willing and that will plug into this culture of willing. So how do you navigate that with those leaders that struggle because they're more preoccupied by what isn't working than what could be working? Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
I mean, this is the biggest problem with leaders. My wife spent 20 years as a Unitarian Universalist minister in churches, and we started introducing Scrum in churches. And I said, you're spending 80% of your time with the 20% of the people who are miserable and just sucking all the energy out of you. And for the 80% of the people who are, who are great, you're not spending enough time with them, so you
Mm,
change your whole way of working. Now, Scrum gives you some leverage on that. Let me give you a business example. I've worked with venture capital groups for since 2005. So I've got 20 years of venture capital experience. We've worked many companies. We booted up with Scrum. I remember one of them in Australia. We started a new team. Uh, they call me up and they say, as soon as we do Scrum, we have a backlog. We know what everybody's doing. So within the first sprint, this first time segment of Scrum, we knew that two people on the team, they had a team of, 6, 7 people, two people on the team delivered nothing. What should we do? So that the first thing is the Scrum makes everything totally transparent. You know who's delivering and you know who doesn't. You know it within a week. So they said, what should we do? I said, well, dude, don't do anything because the Scrum team itself, in the way they work, they do planning together and then they do reviews together and then they do retrospectives. See if the team is able to figure this out. So they were doing a 2 week sprint. So 2 weeks later, I talked to them again. They said, hey, in the last 2 weeks, one of these guys is just delivering just like the rest of them. But the one guy, he's still not delivering anything. And I said, well, then you decide what to do. And so the company leader said, well, we don't have time to waste. I'm going to move him out of the company. So that way, that's the way Scrum works. And there's a process where that happens in Scrum. Initially, you try to let the team work it out because some people the team will fix, right? But then if it's not working, then the Scrum Master, who's a facilitative leader, needs to have a conversation like, what's the problem? Maybe the person has a problem. Maybe they just got divorced or they have a sick kid or something that's preoccupying them. Or maybe they just are in the wrong job. They're not suited for what they are. And so the Scrum Master tries to work that out with them. If they can't, then in Scrum, it's then kicked up to the leader. As a team and as a Scrum Master, we try to figure out how to make this work. And it isn't. So now it's a leadership problem. What are you going to do? And the leader has multiple options. As someone who's led multiple hundreds of teams in large organizations, as the chief technology officer or sometimes the CEO, I said we're not going to worry about trying to fix people if we have 100 teams. It's too much to worry about. We're going to only worry about whether a team performs or not. And when we boot up a team, they are going to deliver something useful in the very first sprint within 1 or 2 weeks, or we're going to disband that team and put them on other teams. And that way we never have a dysfunctional team. And I said, as far as the teams by themselves, it's the team's responsibility that everybody on the team is actually helping the team. And so if somebody's not doing that, it's the responsibility of the team to throw somebody off the team if they're blocking them instead of helping them, then they have the authority to throw the person off the team.
I remember there was a time many years ago where, as the team was growing, we started to have some cracks in the foundation and a little bit of conflict maybe, or disgruntled energy there. I couldn't put my finger on it. And instead of me assigning a solution and trying to coach people into adapting the culture, I ended up assigning two people on the team as the leader to work together and create, like in a project basis, to create their version of the best process. Since like basically two people on the team were following a different process to the same outcome, which was creating a little bit of disruption. And so I said, why don't I'm going to put you two on a cohort and you're going to create a presentation for the rest of the team on your compilation of best practices. And that's going to be the new way forward. And it ended up being super successful, like letting the team help the team. I do want to back up a minute because you've shared a lot of language from the book that I know well and that I love. I'm a huge sprinter. I love sprinting and then rest and recover. And I instead of having long drawn out objectives and projects. And you talked about, the review and the retrospective and the scrum master versus the leader. So can you break it down for us a little bit? Like give us the framework of Scrum, I guess the cliff notes of it, because the book really goes into a deep dive on it. All your books do, but can you share a little bit about the concept of Scrum itself?
Okay, so the first thing in Scrum is we break all the work down into small pieces, and then we prioritize the pieces. As soon as we do that, we find that a lot of the things that are low priority really shouldn't be done. They don't add that much value. And in fact, at an enterprise level, even at Toyota, who is more efficient than most companies, as soon as we got all the executives together and prioritized every project, every initiative they had, we found that the bottom 30% shouldn't be done. So you can not do 30% of what you're doing, and that's going to immediately give you a lot more capability. Now, of the rest, we know we have massive amounts of data in the software domain, and it's true in other domains too. Of the 70% of stuff that you think should be done, only about 25 or 30% of that is actually really useful to your customers. And so you don't want to do that other stuff either. So it turns out about 25% of the stuff in your list are the only things that should be worked on this week, nothing else. And so now you've got the work broken down into small pieces, it's prioritized, and you're avoiding doing 75% of the stuff that you thought you needed to do. And now you want to break down the interval that you're doing into short increments. And in Scrum, every increment we call a sprint is kind of an experiment. We think we can do these things in this week. Let's do it and see what happens. Now, as soon as you start doing stuff, you find that some things work, some things don't work. There are ways you could do it better. So then when you come into the next cycle, you actually change the way you work. So the next cycle is better than the first cycle. This is extremely important now in the age of AI because I have two human teams and a AI team that I work with every day. The AI team is 30 times faster than the human teams, and we have to all work together. And it's not unusual for the AI and on day two of the week to discover we really should be doing something totally different. Let's rewrite everything we're doing because it will be much better. And so the team has to have the ability to respond in real time to the rapid, deep understanding that you can get with AI assistance. Today, the latest AIs are PhD level in everything. So what we try to do is get everybody paired with an AI. We try to get an AI working as a member of the team, and that means more and more adaptability. So the shorter time box that you do your work in, the easier it is to change and take advantage of new things, right? So we break into small pieces, we do them in small amounts of time, and we use very small teams to do them. It turns out that the optimal team size is 5 or 6 people. Again, we have massive amounts of data in the software domain showing that if you increase a 6 person team to a 17 person team, it will take longer to get the same thing done than the 6 people will because there's so much disruption from communication overhead and people stepping on each other. And yet we still go into companies, we see teams of 15 people. Teams of 15 people do not work. One of the reasons Elon Musk is so successful is he refused to be in a meeting with more than 5 people. And that would be a good policy for all of your listeners.
So
Because
let me ask you something because earlier, before we started recording, we talked a little bit about your work and understanding in neuroscience and psychology. And one of the things I'm always curious about is what do you think it is at the root level that creates the fear and resistance around change in general? Like you talked about this, it's, agile leadership is the willingness to adapt to change. And in the real estate industry right now, there's a lot happening right now. There's a lot of change. There's a lot of, the interest rates, the inventory, the market, the, AI, whatever, people changing companies, companies buying companies. And it's, if you're willing to adapt, as you said, you will be the most successful. And it's something that Gary Keller and Jay Papasan wrote about in the book Shift. Is like in 2010 they published Shift after the 2008-2009 real estate shift, and they highlighted the adaptability and the agile aspect of those who found success in spite of circumstances that are changing. And you can't control the circumstances, so you can only control your response. What is it that I guess maybe what advice can you give or have you given when you've walked into a place and you can feel energetically that this is a stagnant culture? These people are all just in their own heads and in their own way.
that's quite common. One of the things we find is setting up the Scrum teams and setting up the way they work and starting it is the best way to start to overcome that, to service all the problems and start clearing it out. Basically, we work the process to clean that up, right? And people have a big decision to make. I mean, right now, I'm 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 advising a lot of people on investing, and you know, if you live in the world of the dollar, the value of the dollar has gone down by, I think, 28.8% since 2020. So a third of your money has disappeared. And now people are struggling to have ends meet, right? They don't have enough money and they blame it on inflation. But inflation is the policy of the US government. 2%, right, is the policy. But if you actually look at what's going on in the world, technology is advancing so rapidly and it's accelerating so dramatically from AI that the price of everything is actually going down. And you can do an analysis and show on the average, the price of most everything goes down 8% every year. So if the price of everything is going down 8% of every year, and the government policy is 2% inflation because they have to have that policy because of the way the money system works, then the government has to make your dollar worth 10% less every year by printing more money. So that means you're living in a world where you're always trying to catch up, right? But if you live in a different world uh, with Bitcoin, or there are some equivalents to Bitcoin that are increasing in value 40 or 50% every year, you're riding a wave where the price of everything in Bitcoin is decreasing every year, and you have more and more capability to buy stuff. So you're living in abundance versus scarcity. And that is a decision. And one of the things we have to do with people, person by person, is say to them, do you want to stay stuck for the rest of your life as a wage slave, impoverished, or do you want to be free? If you want to be free, you have to change your mindset. You have to face the fact that the debasement of the currency is making you a slave forever. And you have to move all your efforts into an area where you're taking advantage of the rapid improvement in technology that's making everything cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, right? And step one is have people have a glimmer of hope that there's another world out there, because there is actually, and be willing to entertain steps that will take them away from what's holding them back.
I
I mean,
love
that's
that. That there's a glimmer of hope that there's another world out there.
there's another world out there that's abundant, where you have more than enough, not only everything you need, but more. And do you want to move towards that world, or do you want to stay stuck in the world that you think is the only world that exists? No, that's being stuck in inflation and not having enough money is not the only world that exists.
I love that. I think it's a perfect exclamation point to the conversation. I just appreciate you sharing the background of this framework and also the history of it, really, because it's you're changing lives and you've impacted so many lives. And what a gift to get the opportunity to have you as the author here on the show, because I'm always trying to regurgitate your brilliance and I can never do it quite as well as you can. So thank you so much, Jeff.
Well, it's great to talk with you, and if I can help in any way, let me know.
I definitely will. And thank you so much to our listeners for tuning in. As always, if you had any takeaways, please send Jeff a message on LinkedIn, send me a DM on Instagram at Pursuing Freedom Official. Jeff, where are the best places for people to find you, get a hold of you, learn from you, etc., besides the books?
Well, obviously, scruminc.com is my company. Uh, I have another company, jvsmanagement.com, where I'm doing all my blogging on the latest thinking in Scrum. And you can go there. I'm doing a lot of work with AI right now in Scrum, introducing AI into Scrum, making it much more, getting 10 times the work in a tenth of the time. That's my current goal.
Awesome. I love it. We'll be sure to drop those links in the show notes. And my friends, if you're listening and you've been loving this podcast for a long time and you haven't yet stopped what you're doing and left that 5-star review, please do so, because, I beg you, because it helps us continue to attract amazing guests like Dr. Sutherland here and helps this content get found so more people can go ahead and build a life you don't need a vacation from. I love you guys. I appreciate you. We'll see you next time.